Dying Light 2 Stay Human lands a whole 7 years after the original game, a direct successor that builds on its unique blend of survival mechanics and parkour action. The world is much bigger this time, more fleshed out. A giant overgrown city, known simply as The City, opens out in the wake of an apocalypse. The dividing line between humanity and the undead is clear. Humans are pushed to the safe refuge of building tops, the high rises, and meanwhile the undead creatures dwell on its streets and become all the more dangerous after sundown. Ideally, it's best to avoid them altogether, and so that's where your trusty parkour skills come in handy. From a Mirror's Edge style first-person view, you freely climb, jump, zipline and paraglide, with some beautiful animation work added for the sequel. Developer Techland's animation team is in great form here. There's a real rhythm to Dying Light 2's movement, especially once you learn its controls. A rhythm that blends into its combat too, when dodging and countering more advanced enemy types. And much like Mirror's Edge, the world design itself plays a huge part in making this sense of momentum addictive, in making a huge 3D landscape look all at once natural, while using a kind of visual language to show what can and cannot be climbed. Not just for big cityscapes either. The C engine at Dying Light 2's core also puts rich, dense woodland areas in front of you to climb or rope across. So for example, this leafy mountainous area sets the stage for a quick tutorial on Dying Light 2's mechanics. It's a challenge with only a few undead to distract as you learn the basics, but equally, it's a great demonstration of Dying Light 2's tech right after booting it up, especially on new consoles. Which brings us to the topic for today: how do PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and Series S run the game? Does the frame rate hold up at 60 FPS in the performance mode only available to PS5 and Series X? And likewise, does the 30 FPS target on Series S, which has no other optional modes, hold up? Lastly, but perhaps most importantly, just how transformative are the quality and resolution modes on PS5 and Series X, letting us boost pixel counts to near 4K, and even add ray trace shadows and ambient occlusion to Dying Light 2's world? Let's find out. Without question, Dying Light 2 looks great on all three current gen machines. Woodland areas flow beautifully with limited pop-in. Even on Series S, animations, texture quality and lighting hold up to PS5 and Series X here, the big downside being in resolution and frame rate. Sadly, Series S is fixed at a native 1080p and 30 frames per second no matter what. By comparison, PS5 and Series X have a big advantage in offering 3 modes with unique benefits. PS5 to start. As standard, Dying Light 2 boots on a performance mode, targeting a fluid 60 frames per second. The downside to performance mode is its rendering at a native 1080p. A steep hit to image quality only helped by the engine's TAA solution and motion blur. Still, this 60 FPS mode best brings out the sense of weight and movement in the game's parkour. Next, there's a resolution mode, bumping the visuals up to a native 3200 by 1800. We have no dynamic scaling in evidence here, and 1800p is the fixed target on PS5, but the cost is in capping the frame rate to 30 FPS. Lastly then, we have the quality mode on PS5. This is the big one. Quality mode adds ray trace shadows and ambient occlusion across the scene, and even ray trace torchlights while traveling through tunnels. The catch being, yes, well, it runs at a native 1080p and 30 frames per second as the trade-off. Ray tracing is a key upgrade for Dying Light 2 though, which makes it worth considering even at 1080p 30. Just for the sense of added depth that ray trace shadows add to swaying grass. Check out this 3-way split between all the modes on PS5. With no RT enabled on the other 2 modes, grass appears plain, stripped of realistic shading that completes this scene. With ray trace shadows enabled, character shadows also logically become more diffuse the further away it gets from the light source. In close interior areas, the difference isn't quite as vast, but outside, the quality mode has a huge impact. Split three ways like this, PS5 and Series X, which I'll get to, have a wealth of great options. It's obviously a shame we only get to pick one benefit though, 60fps, 1800p or ray tracing, but at least we have leeway to define the experience ourselves. Also, sadly, ray traced reflections aren't included in quality mode. We get a typical screen space method of reflections, in this case, one that's used regardless of mode or platform, with the usual fade out to detail towards the screen's edges. Still, the RT shadows do get a much better showcase in Dying Light 2, given areas with water bodies or puddles aren't constantly on show. Any area with a low sun at dawn or dusk makes RT shadows stick out immediately, and for me, this is the game that opened my eyes to the worth of the feature. Overall on PS5, it's hard to definitively say which mode is worth picking. Honestly, I spent most of my playthrough on performance mode since 60fps matters most to me, but the ray trace shadows and AO are a serious highlight. Next up, let's switch focus to Xbox Series X. Let's go straight for the mode comparison too, since fundamentally a lot of the basics are really just the same as PS5, barring one point. The point being, in the resolution mode on left, Series X pushes its pixel count even higher to 3456 by 1944, rather than 1800p used on PS5. I'll get to a comparison shortly with PS5, but this three-way split otherwise works the exact same way on Series X. Resolutions drop to 1080p for the performance and quality modes, and so the biggest advantage technically from hours of testing is that boost to 1944p on resolution mode. Let's put some stats behind that resolution difference. At 1944p, Series X has an edge over PS5's 1800p by rendering around 16.6% more pixels overall. That's the on-paper advantage anyway. In side-by-sides on the resolution mode though, I've got to say it's much harder to spot. Techland's TAA and motion blur methods filter the action effectively enough to reduce aliasing. Still, in scenarios with fine details, meshes, fences, Series X will reduce visual noise on a 4K display. Visually, there's little otherwise to split them. Across all three modes, there's parity with one curious difference. In the non-ray tracing modes, performance and resolution, PS5 and Series X render shadows differently. Often trees on PS5 are fully shaded, while Series X and even Series S leave these trees lighter and with less shade. The time of day appears to be matched, and so it's honestly a bit of a mystery as to why, but worth noting here. Of course, it's worth saying Series S, for all the limits it has in running at 1080p and 30fps, does still hold up to the other two in core visual features. The bad news, it has no ray tracing option and no 60fps mode either. What you see is what you get. In comparison with Series X in resolution mode, you also see a marked cutback in overall pixel detail, obviously. It's perhaps a shame, but forms a growing trend with Series S releases, where it's so often without the extra frills on PS5 and Series X. On the plus side, performance is, at least in my Series S playthrough, a rock-solid 30fps. In the big city or parkouring through the woodlands, developer Techland nails this aspect of Dying Light 2 across the board. Frame rates are stuck to that 30fps cap with little issue on Series S through the opening few hours. The only real exception is in the first cutscene here. Screen tearing kicks in just as our character runs out of the underpass. It's brief, it's fleeting, and the frame rate isn't affected either. It stays mostly steady at 30 regardless. Talking on performance, PS5 and Xbox Series X run equally well, and regardless of which mode you're using. So for example, at 60fps on performance mode, you're getting a perfect line across the board, PS5 or Series X. The hit to 1080p is a big one of course, but at least the payoff is here in the smooth outlay of frames. In summary, there's nothing to report on. It's a locked 60fps in performance mode, And even moving to the quality mode with ray tracing enabled at 30 FPS, each console delivers on that target. For PS5, it's a locked 30 FPS line with ray tracing enabled, and likewise on Series X, there's little issue. Even frame pacing holds steady from every area I've tested on console so far, and while the sample size is limited to the opening 3 hours on each console, so far it bodes very well for general performance if you want to keep RT shadows enabled. In terms of optimization, Dying Light 2 is nicely suited for current gen machines. Now, I did leave one small nitpick for last. The resolution mode on PS5 and Series X is the only mode I've played where I did notice some very brief dips under 30 FPS. I will stress 99% of the time it's perfect, but diving underwater in this particular section on PS5, for example, cues a frame rate lurch to the mid-20s with a bout of screen tear. I mean, it's not huge drama, but likewise, swapping to Series X, we get a similar result in just this spot. My best guess, the alpha effects combined with high resolutions are the fundamental cause for a kind of GPU bottleneck. Still, it took a lot of searching to find anything of note in terms of a frame rate drop, and I think it's to Dying Light 2's credit that it's mostly locked everywhere else. In review then, PS5 and Xbox Series X owners get a real luxury of options in Dying Light 2. Ray-traced shadows, 60 FPS, and 4K support are all worth checking out. The only real pity is, of course, we can't have it all in one playthrough, and each mode has a clear downside. It's a vote of support for a new generation of hardware at least, putting all options in players' hands, where Series S users get very little beyond the core game at 1080p and 30 FPS. The biggest revelation for me is just how effective ray-traced shadows are in the right time and place. Dying Light 2 creates plenty of showcase moments, even from the start with its low-cast sun streaking shadows across woods to make ray tracing stand out. It's a huge upgrade next to the other modes, and well worth considering for anyone jumping into Dying Light's world. 3 consoles and 3 modes covered, but that's all I have for today. If you did enjoy this look at Dying Light 2, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch, as always, I'll be on Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.